Well, hello everybody, wherever you are in the world, and welcome to this edition of our In Conversation pieces from the Chartered Institute of Logistics and Transport. My name's John Harris. I'm the International Education Lead at CILT, and I'm delighted to have with us for the next half an hour or so, Gamu Matarira, who is the founder and CEO of Gen A Consultancy. And we're going to be talking about the whole issue of digitalisation, particularly how that affects the African communities. So just a little bit of background. Gamu works and leads a UK-based Africa-facing company, which help businesses achieve better profitability, performance and impact, particularly within the small, medium enterprise sector. She's very skilled at facilitating and building business connections through global partnerships. So she's got a real passion and a real outlook around cultivating sustainability in Africa. Gamu's a hybrid professional, and she also brings together like-minded leaders together and bridges the gaps between business and society. She's got over 20 years experience in international business environments, and that's taken her to Japan, Middle East, Africa, and of course here in the UK. So she's focusing her time helping entrepreneurs gain clarity and growth while making a real impact in the African continent. She's got a holistic approach to consultancy, and she sources opportunities for socially conscious organizations looking to bring their goods and services into the African space. Now, of course, training, digital, all fits into that space. So with no more ado, let's hear from Gamu. So Gamu, a very warm welcome to CILT. And perhaps you'd like to start by telling us a little bit about yourself and kind of why you're so passionate about these issues.
Sure, thanks, John. So my name is Gamu Matarira, and I'm a Scottish-born, globally raised citizen of the world. I'm also of Zimbabwean heritage. I was fortunate enough to be raised by well-traveled parents, as the exposure really broadened my outlook from a very young age and unearthed this desire to understand and appreciate a variety of cultures. Now, coming from a family with several business and investment interests, I naturally began my career in investment accounting with the BBC Worldwide. I very quickly realized that's not who I am. And this led to the decision to move to Japan to try out teaching, which actually came naturally to me. So I kind of immersed myself in the Japanese way of life, turning what was initially a 12-month stint into 3 years. And I found a way really to combine my academic nature with my business skills and intercultural sensitivities that I'd actually developed all my life by taking on several strategic roles at the University of Hertfordshire here in the UK. And a common theme was starting really to develop during this time, where I seemed to have a knack for bringing even the most difficult of characters around a table to collaboratively create something new for the betterment of all stakeholders involved. And I couldn't really define what I did as I created a lot of my own roles as I went along. But it was during this time that I acquired my master's in practice-based research, where I started to specialize in cultural diversity and internationalization. And this really gave me a platform from which to recommend more diverse organizational practices and policies. Fast forward 5 years in Abu Dhabi, where I was developing their national vocational and corporate training platforms, I kind of realized I had a bigger role to play on the world stage by combining all my skills to date, my know-how and life experiences. So I decided to give up secure employment and fulfill my purpose by becoming an entrepreneur.
Excellent. So let's go straight to that. So Gen A sounds a really exciting proposition. Just tell us a little bit about that. Obviously, you've gone on this journey kind of realizing your kind of true potential and the talents you can bring and kind of gluing, you know, diverse needs together and getting some consensus. How did Gen A come about, and where does the passion come from in terms of serving the African market in particular?
Sure. So basically, about 3 years ago, I had an epiphany. I'd been responding to international governments' calls for development, but Africa was somewhat calling me back. In 2018, I embarked on an MBA, and I used it as a platform to research the enterprising landscape of Africa with a view to really understanding the facts as seen from the perspective of businesses on the continent, not that widely circulated rhetoric believed by most. So I researched, where the barriers to trade actually exist, where gaps in information and knowledge actually are, and what perspectives prevail that either foster or hinder progress on the continent. And this actually is what led me to launching Gen A Consultancy 18 months ago, which is actually Africa facing. And as you said, as you already introduced me, helping socially conscious international businesses to expand their goods and services into the continent. Now, as that sort of developed, as you get deeper and deeper into understanding, your space, I started to really realize that there's, as much as we think there are differences because this is a completely different continent, there's actually so much more that that we have in common than the differences that actually exist. So in parallel, I actually work collaboratively with partners and associates to facilitate the growth of SMEs in Africa. So to building a pipeline from the other way around to empower them to participate more widely in intra-African trade as well as global value chains. And I really see Africa-friendly investors and anyone willing to give Africa a fair chance to do business and move her away from that dependency of aid. I see everybody in that pool as Generation Africa. That's the name Gen A. And ultimately, I'm invested in creating synergies for strong international collaboration through entrepreneurship training, strategy coaching, business development activities to help foster sustainability and cross-border strategic partnerships. So it really feels more like a full circle, sort of coming back to the roots kind of journey for me. And yeah, I just feel like I'm in the right place at the right time.
Yeah, no, thank you, Gamu, for just being so inspirational and very open about those motivations. Yeah, we've got a lot of tools in the supply chain and logistics training toolbox, but actually it's important that the passion is there. And I'm hearing a lot of E words around empowerment, entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
If we reflect a little bit about your career, so you've done, if I can say, more conventional work in terms of training, education and capacity building, you've now sort of moved it up a gear with Gen A. Just take a big picture position. I mean, perhaps reflect on this globally for the minute. Is what's your view on digitalization and its impact on that learning and training and capacity building? What's your view if you stand back and just say, look, digitalization, okay, it's a good thing, but what does this actually really mean in terms of those entrepreneurs and those people that need to be empowered? What's your thoughts?
So I feel that digitalization has really changed the way we work, the way we communicate, how we transact, and most importantly for this conversation, how we learn and deliver learning. I've keenly followed the buzz around bringing learners in line with the 21st century skills, the No Child Left Behind movement, how everyone must prepare for the fourth industrial revolution. And I think one important thing to note is that the digital transformation of everything we do is not really optional anymore. It's an urgent priority everywhere. Anyone who's neglected digital education, for example, so far has experienced a rude awakening due to this coronavirus pandemic. And with the outbreak of the crisis, digital technology has become an important tool more than at any other time before, because it facilitates the development of learners through the dissemination of information and knowledge by institutions. Now, the thing we have to be careful about is digital skills not only imply the need to implement technological innovations, but also to prepare people to face those emerging societal challenges such as privacy, ethical concerns, mental and physical health, which are also related to digitalization and so on. But having said that, we should also always be aware that the evolution of digitalization is happening at different rates across the world. And it's harnessed with differing priorities as well, particularly in learning and training sectors. For example, here in the West and in advanced Eastern societies, you find digitalization has created this new capacity for collaboration networks, which facilitate the sharing of resources between organizations, for example, or even making use of data and in turn developing more flexibility for themselves. And it allows organizations to remain competitive. You just have to look at how sort of the larger higher education institutions open up international branches or even centers of excellence around the world. And then you kind of get an understanding of where this is headed. But in Africa and most of Asia, digitalization drives socioeconomic transformation. And it's one of the most powerful tools for implementing, for example, Africa's 2030 agenda for sustainable development. And one of those agendas is access to quality education. So in the last 15 years, the growth of digital technology, mainly driven by the mobile revolution and also associated innovations, has been one of the highlights of African development. However, Africa remains the least digitally connected region compared to other parts of the world. And institutions adopting digital technologies actually are the exception rather than the norm. And this is an environment where digital inclusion must be at the center of resetting that education agenda across the continent.
Excellent. No, thank you for picking up on that Africa dimension, because I guess even within the African continent, we see a variety of transformation, if you like. It's happening at different places. You've got internal, intra-country digital partnerships, and then you've got the wider international world kind of looking in, saying, how easy is it for me to do business? How can I work with an SME? Let's stay with those big questions. So where, in your view, are the biggest dangers in simply digitalizing because it's a good thing to do? So if we just take a transformation package that just deals with the digital process and applies that to education and learning, what's the danger there? What is there a social equity consequence that if that's done badly, actually it has a negative impact on those societies rather than a positive one?
Yeah. So digitalization, it can be seen as a critical reinforcement tool for skills development, for education services, but an overemphasis on it brings with it a number of challenges, which I'm sure you're aware of. Sure, it's a tool for reducing inequality significantly, as it can facilitate reaching even the most marginalized and vulnerable amongst us. But we can't ignore the fact that it automatically excludes a proportion of society from participation, because access is still an ongoing issue. And to put it into context, because of a rise globally in demand for digital technology professionals, there's an emphasis on developing STEM skills in individuals. And STEM is naturally technology oriented, isn't it? And governments and organizations around the world, they are actually supportive of this movement. But if you look at it from an individual level, not all learners are able to engage with the infrastructure for STEM education. So yes, there's a social equity issue, and it really is about fair access to learning. So I feel that many training institutions are employing the latest technologies in a bid to stay relevant and competitive. And by all means, this might be the right strategy for them to take, but compounded by the fact that many schools and campuses have had to close due to the pandemic, digital platforms have become the go-to solution. But equally, educational institutions must remain cognizant of the fact that there's always an underserved segment of society with no to low basic digital skills. And their means of access to learning might differ. And this ties directly into the attainment gaps that we see across education. With such individuals, they're always at greater risk of unemployment, of greater poverty, social exclusion. And of course, there's a problem, because when you look at industry, there could be a mismatch between what the labor demands and the supply, the pipeline of people who are able to meet those skills that industry is looking for.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're spot on there, Gamu, that with access to learning, yes, we can digitalize, we can improve, but actually, unless it widens the talent pool that can actually access this in the first place, I guess all we're doing is just improving the quality of the service of the people that can have an opportunity to learn. And actually, I guess the moral duty, and if we link that back to the UN Sustainable Development Goals and sustainability within any country or town, is, well, how are the people actually, they've got more than the ability to learn STEM, more than the ability to learn, but actually because of cost, because of access to basic IT, because of having to use internet cafes and other things to actually even download their assignments, it actually is a barrier. And for those that could easily be put off, or it's just too difficult, they might disengage. So I'm with you on this, that there's a social dimension here as well as a digital one, isn't there?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And we always have to remember that technology is here to facilitate what we want it to do. It's not here to sort of, it's not the driving force really. It's always, it starts with the human being and the context within which we want it to work for us, and then we employ it to support that. So yeah, so we have to think of both dimensions in parallel.
So let me move that question. I think you've hit the nail on the head that doing things digitally has to come with a greater good, a greater purpose. So I'm going to move this on to the business community. So you're talking about small, medium enterprises. We know in Africa, it's a diverse continent, a lot of different cultures. There's rural, urban dynamics going on and other socioeconomic factors in any country. But I think, you know, from my experience, and we've got about 14, 15 CILT branches across Africa, and 50% of our learners globally are actually from that continent. What I'm picking up here is that the entrepreneur is actually seen as a real driving force. And I think without exception, many of the African countries are looking to that small, medium enterprise economy to rebuild and to help with sustainability. So if we now talk about the SME sector, how do you think digitalization can help enable those businesses to make real changes, to speed up their success? And do you think that digital should always be subservient to the wider business needs, or is there a case that sometimes digital actually will push the transformation? What do you think about that, Gamu?
So I do think digitalization plays several key roles in the African context. As I briefly mentioned earlier, it actually is the driving force behind socioeconomic transformation on the continent. The major uses at the moment, or the way it's actually seen as a supportive tool, is it increases efficient production and distribution of goods and services. It's helping to open up new opportunities for income generation for millions of poor people. And it's also enhancing the connectivity between people, communities, governments, and organizations. But nowadays, more than 80% of Africa's population has a mobile phone subscription. And in several African countries, the digital economy is becoming one of the main drivers of growth, accounting for around 5% of GDP. You just have to look at the, you know, the innovation hubs in Rwanda and, you know, the money transfer economy that's growing. There's several companies such as M-Pesa and Stellulent that are taking off, and many others across the continent that look similar to that. Now, new and emerging mobile-enabled platforms across the region have actually disrupted traditional value chains in different sectors of the economy as well. And digital trade is rapidly growing. Fintech services have become a powerful lever for growth and for financial inclusion as well. They provide large numbers of services to people who would ordinarily be excluded from basic financial services. There are many countries in sub-Saharan Africa that are home to countless SMEs in relation to the economic size of the country. However, there are almost entirely, you know, most of these SMEs are almost entirely micro companies that are commonly operating in the informal sector. So we have to really bear that in mind, because although entrepreneurship is booming in Africa, and you talk about having branches across Africa, CILT's branches across Africa, it would be interesting to look at what is the makeup of the type of entrepreneur or the type of individual that's coming to you. Because you will find that the majority may feel they don't actually have that access to you. So there's so many entrepreneurs that you may not be reaching at all because of this connectivity issue. But regardless, few governments are also investing strategically in developing digital infrastructure services, skills, and entrepreneurship. I don't feel there's enough being done. I know these are a lot of policy agendas that are being put out there, but in practice, a lot more needs to be done. And there's also this need to adapt and harmonize the legislations on technology, including, you know, intellectual property and data privacy, to really unleash Africa's digital potential. Now, talking about the next question, in terms of should digital always be subservient to wider business needs? Well, whether you know it or not, your organization is part of a larger business ecosystem. And, you know, the fate of it is actually interrelated with the health of every other organization within it. So the culture, the innovation, sustainability, and your focus on the customer experience will actually dictate whether your organization thrives or dies, really. So I don't think we have much of a choice anymore. The reason any business exists is to make profits, and particularly in saturated industries. adopting digital technologies as a means of survival, as it allows a business to be more productive, stay relevant, and therefore competitive. Digital capabilities, they don't only boost revenues, of course. I mean, they help the business to cut costs. So we can't ignore the efficiency gains that are offered by adopting these ways of working, you know. However, a business cannot be divorced from the society in which it operates. And some of the considerations stemming from the society are the lack of knowledge that perhaps managers have of those technologies, and how they could be deployed within the business, the lack of skills among the workforce, and again, connectivity is always a big issue in a lot of areas. So we have to take into consideration that, you know, it's a lot of companies want to adopt the latest technology that's out there, but you have to work within your context to really, for it to make sense within your business and for it to make sense for your people, and of course, for the customer journey.
No, that's excellent. I mean, we know from our own experience that there's different types of SME, and the needs from a micro business that needs to survive and be very lean and agile versus an SME, which in our UK definition is what, you know, 250 employees and a turnover, you know, of 40 million. Yeah, they are very different environments. And I think part of the role of CILT actually is to help those businesses feel that they can engage with the professional body, and that whatever scale they're operating at, they can get the knowledge and they can get the support they need. Now, moving on to a bit of the human dimension, I know you're a big advocate personally of mentoring and coaching. And one of the things that CILT is heavily focused on in Africa at the moment is partnership programs. So, for example, in South Africa, we are working funded through USAID. We're working with one of our training providers to support around about 900 women. Some of these are entrepreneurs, so around 300 of them are entrepreneurs. Around 120 of them are women professionals, particularly targeted at Black women in terms of really getting through the barriers, getting promotion, moving up through their organization. And that's studying our qualifications. And then we also have women and some men, truck drivers as well. Now, this program is led by one of our providers. We're providing the mentoring scheme to support within the transport sector. Similarly, in Nigeria, we're helping a pilot of our youth program. So that's kind of people around, you know, under 30 to 35 years old that want a mentor relationship. We're still seeing a thirst for that human interaction, particularly because of the global impact of COVID. But actually, people just want that human reassurance. Now, where this is going is, well, where do you think digitalization should fit with this type of nurture? I mean, are we going to end up talking to computer-generated avatars that are our mentors, you know? Or actually, in order to have our feet on the ground, is there still a place for that kind of human one-to-one support? And through digital, could we actually access the skills more quickly, more leanly, more efficiently? Where do you think that world of mentoring might go with the digital capacity we now have?
That's a great question. So, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, every entrepreneur or leader in an organization needs access to both mentoring and coaching support, which are on two different ends of the learning spectrum. I mean, mentoring being more the directive way of dealing with a person, and whereas coaching, you know, you're usually sort of helping them through, you know, somebody through questioning and giving them the chance to reflect on where they are and where they want to go. But if we think of the growing number of entrepreneurs sprouting up, particularly in Africa and around the world, the most effective way to make mentoring and coaching accessible to a larger number of them is through digitalization. If you're trying to reach larger numbers, you have to employ technology to some degree. If you look at it specifically from an African standpoint, you know, mentoring tends to happen within close communities. mentoring and coaching, it's usually within closed communities, and these communities are meeting face to face. You talk about working with women, so it'll be groups of women that come together X number of times a week to talk about whatever it is they're doing and sort of share how to improve what they're doing to get to where they want to get to. So, you know, we can't ignore that, for example, the pandemic has revolutionized the way, you know, people operate, forcing them to completely rethink the way they work. But in a lot of cases, there's still a primitive element to communication and to getting together and getting those mentoring and coaching services. So I think a blended approach is what's actually needed, where you can have the platforms which harbor the knowledge and the information and allow for linkages. But you have to be very careful about how that's deployed, because you have to understand the context in which you want to deploy this. And what you'll find in different communities, there is a level of community that is happy to meet online and can access things online and is quite comfortable doing that. I would say Africa has been you know, like most of the world, they've been forced to sort of fast forward this way of working. But having said that, it's still quite difficult because of the issues of connectivity, particularly if you're doing things from home. So there is always this emphasis on we've got to meet face to face and get that done. So you have to allow space for both. Yeah, so I think, you know, mentoring and coaching for businesses in particular, it does need to be aligned with this new context that the mentees are operating in. We have to look at both sides.
No, excellent. And I think that the positive thing is that it will open up more opportunities for placements, for internship. Almost there's an impatience among employers that says, I'll have qualified people, but I need them also to be fully competent and to be able to almost, you know, get on with the job as soon as they walk through the door. So anything that digitally we can connect the skills gaps to the employers, we can do short burst placements, those kinds of things. I do think there's a diet there for that within particularly the African culture. Cool. Just thinking now about digitalization in context, you actually used that word, didn't you? You said that, you know, no one is an island. Your business, your SME is part of an ecosystem that's going on. If we take account of the fact that there's cultural, and I use the word accessibility, both physical and digital, variances within Rwanda, Zimbabwe, Zambia, etc. If you could paint a picture of a connected Africa, what would that feel like for you? What would the end goal be?
I think for Africa, there needs to be an almost independent platform for themselves, which starts from Africa. It starts with the people on the ground defining what it is they need and where their gaps are. And I think partnerships sort of come in to facilitate through, you know, bridging those gaps. And we have actually started talking about creating a joint venture, which we're going to call Co-Angels Development Agency. And it will be a platform that will interconnect the various stakeholders locally on the African continent digitally. Now, for this to work, we would need to work in close partnership with local telecoms companies, with the hope that they'll sponsor the segment of society that would otherwise be left out of the value chain. And they can do this by zero rating the data usage. Because I don't know how much you know about the data costs in Africa, but they're still exorbitant. They're so high at the moment. So you'd also need to work closely with the private sector and local entrepreneurial incubation hubs to facilitate that cross-fertilization of socially impactful ideas. These entrepreneurs are being groomed to focus on solutions that solve a problem within their local context. So that's the great thing about that. And Africa certainly has a way to go to increase participation in digitalization. And it might take some time, but they are on their way. And considering that most African countries are around 70% rural in nature, I'd like to see local entrepreneurs coming together and actually working collaboratively to actually come up with innovative, cost-effective solutions for greater connectivity, instead of relying on the monopolies that are currently in place that everyone complains about in terms of, you know, the pricing just to get connected, right? And I envision an increase in sort of public-private partnerships as local governments and NGOs work with the private sector to tackle this digital divide gap, offering accompanying skilling and reskilling opportunities and developing that infrastructure needed to make these initiatives sustainable, really.
No, fantastic. And I think in summarizing that, you've picked up on some of the key here and now issues like the cost of data. It's a basic thing that's blocking the learning, the mentoring, and perhaps even frustrating an SME that wants to get going but can't because they're so reliant on the internet and connectivity in order to do their business. No, that's a really great answer, Gamu, there. I think we're nearly out of time, but I want to bring it full round to almost a very personal question. And what I would like you to do is just in your mind, just picture, I don't know, an individual. This might be a sort of 20-year-old woman wanting to start up her business within one of the African countries, and she's got a vision and she wants to make it happen. I think digital has to be, we have to measure it personally at the end of the day, and it really has an end impact. So if you could help that person reach their true potential, where would you choose to put the resource? What would you do? I know it's a bit of a difficult question, but just try and imagine that one person sitting there saying, I have a dream, I want to create this, but they're a bit stuck. Where do you think we should start?
I mean, I deeply feel that access to education is a right for every human being. So education should be delivered in such a way that it's affordable, if not free, and we should make sure that it's accessible. Just look at the school closures that have widened the attainment gaps for young people. So I would say investing in digital education platforms and work simulation programs, I think, is where I would sort of focus any sort of digitalization initiatives. Making them accessible, particularly to women and girls in Africa, I think is the way to improve education outcomes. Also, in parallel, producing this pipeline of well-trained experts in the digital era has a direct link to boosting any economy. So I really do think that investment has to go into the infrastructure building to make this possible, because there's no shortage of bright ideas. There's no shortage of, young girls and women, for example, who are fantastic critical thinkers on the continent, who just need a space to be able to be given that fair chance of developing their ideas and actually solve their own problems for their own context. I'm a big believer in collaboration. I think it drives a lot of these things forward. So I think it can be done. I mean, you hear of people like UNESCO and Microsoft working on large projects in Africa. And it still fascinates me that all these years later of being on the continent, there's still a huge chunk of society that can't access the technology that they have and that they're developing. But I do think it's not fair to rely on outside forces. We have governments for a reason. The government needs to play their role, but also the private sector needs to start to take this a lot more serious and start realizing that it's the private sector that will drive a lot of this forward. Everyone has to come around the table to make this happen. It's not going to be, one person or one segment of society that's going to make this happen. So it's a combination of what we all bring to the table, and we all have to want the same end result, and it can be achieved if people put their resources and their thinking together.
Excellent. So, I mean, Gamu, just reflecting on that, you're saying to us we need this kind of bedrock, if you like, of access to skills and learning. That's a foundation. Making sure that larger companies working in Africa have the chance to really embrace the SME sector, accelerate them, positively procure them, is another area. I mean, over the last, half an hour or so, we've actually looked at the whole issues of, the humanness of this, of social equity, of fairness, of human rights. But we've looked at digital within that framework. And I think the big message is, digital is embedded in all of this. But we also have to remember some of those wider moral and social objectives that we're working to as well. And you've explained that really well. I think, you know, in closing, it almost, you know, the stuff you're doing actually does tick a lot of the UN Sustainable Development Goals in terms of what you're trying to achieve. We certainly wish you well in all of your entrepreneurial activities. We are out of time. But folks, if you've been listening, hopefully you've been challenged. Your consciousness has kind of been challenged a bit around, hey, digital's good, but where's it going? And it's also made you think about your own reflective practice. And for each of you listening, you know, think about the one person that through the way you make your business decisions, you could impact upon. So, Gamu, thank you so much for your time and for being with us. Everybody, this was John Harris in conversation with Gamu Matarira. Thank you again.